1 week earlier, Nick was running an important training camp in Florida alongside NFL players Marquise and Corey. One evening, they were having dinner together when Will arrived late. He had just lost his job. To cheer him up, Nick and the others invited Will to join them on a fishing trip the following weekend. That morning, Will arrived very early, full of excitement, and woke Nick up until he had no choice but to get out of bed. 40 sandwiches were prepared for the four-man journey. The two then went to meet Marquise and Wisson. Although the boat could hold up to 11 people, it didn't feel safe. It looked far too small. Marquise were not fully ready for the trip as they were packing to move to Oakland for work. There was no ocean there, and Marquise couldn't imagine living without the waves. The sea made him feel at home. He had no other choice. The group eventually set off toward the harbor. Despite weather forecasts warning of an approaching storm, they decided to go anyway, planning to return before it hit. Their phones were carefully wrapped to keep them waterproof. Will felt uneasy, wondering how they would contact land if something went wrong, even though the boat was equipped with a radio. Hours later, Nick's mother watched the news and learned about the storm. She tried calling him. There was no answer, drowned out by loud conversations and music on the boat. The group moved farther into deeper waters to try a new fishing spot. 4 hours later, Corey hooked a large fish. The fishing line became tangled with the boat. Nick started feeling seasick while Marquise and Will remained completely at ease on the open water. Thunder echoed in the distance and the sky grew darker. It was time to head back. Corey tried to pull up the anchor. It felt stuck on something and refused to move. They all pulled together. The anchor didn't budge. As the thunder drew closer, they tied the rope to the boat instead of cutting it. Marquise started the engine. The anchor dragged the boat sharply to one side. He pushed the engine to full power. Water rushed onto the deck. Suddenly, a massive wave crashed over them, throwing everyone into the sea. They fought their way back to the surface. The boat had capsized. Together, they tried to flip it back over. It failed. Every effort was useless. Will suggested cutting the anchor loose so they could right the boat. Marquise dove underwater to cut the rope while the others stayed close. He succeeded. The group tried again to flip the boat. It still wouldn't turn. Hours later, Marquise remembered the life jackets inside the boat. Getting them wasn't easy with soaked clothing. He decided to strip off his clothes, risking his body heat to survive. That decision proved costly. When he opened the hatch to search for the life jackets, water rushed in faster, forcing the boat lower into the sea. The other three panicked. Just in time, Marquise managed to close the hatch before the boat sank completely. He resurfaced with only one life jacket. Will later retrieved the remaining life jackets. Marquise went back down again, this time searching for signal flares. Corey, already hungry, dove in to look for food. He came back empty-handed. A ship passed nearby, they screamed for help and fired a flare. The ship never saw them. Later, Nick dove down and recovered the bag containing their phones. The group tried calling 911. There was absolutely no signal. Meanwhile, Nick's wife grew increasingly worried and called his mother. They realized it was time to seek help. Police arrived at the harbor and discovered the abandoned vehicle and trailer. Recognizing the severity of the situation, they immediately alerted the Coast Guard. The wives called one another, offering comfort and trying to stay strong together. Out at sea, the men were repeatedly thrown off the boat by violent waves. Thanks to the life jackets, they managed to swim back and climb onto the overturned hull. Without proper clothing, their body temperatures dropped rapidly. Nick kept encouraging everyone to stay focused and survive together. When the rain suddenly stopped, they believed the storm had finally passed. Without warning, a massive wave slammed into them, hurling them off the boat once again. Thunder roared overhead. They were separated for several terrifying minutes, and the boat drifted away. Corey spotted it first and climbed back on, making himself visible so the others could follow. As they struggled to get back aboard, another surge crashed down, forcing them back into the water. By now, they had been lost at sea for 10 hours. Corey tried to keep spirits up, while Marquise grew noticeably weaker, doubting he would survive. Nick urged him to think about his family for strength. Marquise began hallucinating as hypothermia took hold. The others gathered around him and ignited another flare, hoping to keep him warm. After 20 hours, the rain returned. Marquise slowly slipped off the boat. Will grabbed him, trying to pull him back. Disoriented, Marquise lashed out and accidentally punched Will in the face. Nick helped Will climb back up while Corey held Marcus in place, struggling against his hypothermic delirium. Eventually, they managed to get him back onto the boat. The wives contacted the Coast Guard office to report the men missing. The abandoned vehicle was immediately identified as theirs. Captain Timothy ordered a rescue helicopter to launch at once. The situation was now critical. The search proved extremely difficult. Visibility was nearly zero, and the storm had damaged the radar systems. The two wives searched for Marquise's old GPS device, hoping it still contained coordinates of his favorite fishing spots. Just as Captain Timothy called to say the pilots would have to turn back without a lead, the GPS was found. His team checked the coordinates and identified a known shipwreck in that area. The wives confirmed they had heard stories about it before. Timothy immediately redirected the rescue helicopter toward that location. Back at sea, the men were constantly slipping off the boat as the waves grew more violent. Corey began feeling intensely hot, a dangerous sign of severe hypothermia. Will tried to help him regulate his breathing. Marquise fell again, this time too weak to swim. Will was thrown into the water as well. Nick jumped into the water to search for Marquise. Darkness and relentless waves pushed him back again and again. Realizing he risked drowning, Nick was forced to return to the boat. The three men screamed in despair, knowing Marquise would never come back. Overcome with grief, Corey shoved Will away. Will pulled him back into a tight embrace, holding him as they endured the pain together. At that moment, a rescue helicopter flew overhead. Nick turned on his phone's flashlight, and all three shouted at the top of their lungs. The pilot still couldn't see them and began considering turning back. Unexpectedly, the phone flashlight wasn't bright enough to be seen. Although it had been checked, it was mistaken for a reflection on the water and dismissed. The search was suspended until the storm passed. The news forced the wives to stay hopeful, holding each other's hands for comfort. Timothy requested assistance from the vessel Tornado to help search for the missing boat. By morning, only Nick and Will remained on the boat. They kept shouting Corey's name, receiving no response. Will lost faith in his own survival, believing he would not make it through this and would meet the same fate as Marquise and Corey. Nick insisted that Will put on more clothes. Will didn't care and kept diving into the boat to search, leading to an argument between them. Suddenly, two sharks appeared, sending them into panic. They moved to the highest point on the boat. The sharks were likely drawn by the fish they had caught earlier. The sharks circled and scavenged around the boat. The sandwiches Will had prepared the day before floated away from them. Neither of them could reach the food, and getting back into the water was impossible. The two tried talking to pass the time and escape the reality around them. Will began praying, clinging to his faith. Nick saw no meaning in prayer. If a God truly existed, this situation would never have happened in the first place. Nick grew frustrated, and Will urged him not to abandon God. Nick hugged him, saying he would not give up on anything. Together, they continued repeating their mantra of resilience. Television news reported on the missing NFL players. The Tornado continued searching, though poor visibility limited what they could see. Nick's wife informed his parents that the search had been delayed. His mother became furious and rushed to the office to confront Timothy. He explained that he couldn't risk the pilots' lives, yet promised the search would resume soon. She feared her son might already be dead, and Timothy tried to reassure her. Out at sea, Nick and Will continued battling the waves. Nick came up with an idea to rip out cables from the engine and tie themselves to the boat. Will feared what could happen if the boat sank, knowing they would drown. Nick saw it differently. Without doing something, they would drown anyway. In the end, the cables proved useful. They were less likely to be thrown off and could climb back onto the boat more easily. Once again, a rescue helicopter flew overhead. Despite shouting and waving, Nick and Will felt overwhelming despair. Will realized they had been in the water for 24 hours and wondered why no one had come to save them. Daylight improved visibility. He decided to untie the cables and managed to find some food and a bottle of water. Will accidentally spotted something in the distance and believed it was land. Meanwhile, Nick tried calling 911 and texting his wife, yet there was still no signal. He questioned whether they were hallucinating, then realized two people couldn't be seeing the same illusion. Since the rescue helicopter had already passed without seeing them, Will took the risk of untying himself and swam toward what he believed was land. After only a few minutes, they lost sight of both the object and the boat. They couldn't even see each other anymore. They swam back, searching the surrounding area. Nick was lucky enough to find the boat again. Will reached it shortly after, and they climbed back on together. The storm finally passed. The tornado and the rescue helicopter resumed their search. This time, the radar was working clearly. After 30 hours at sea, Will fell completely silent, worrying Nick. In reality, Will was imagining his own funeral, wondering whether he would even be present at it. Will lay down, his body trembling, thinking about how things might have been different if he had been married, if a wife had kept him at home. As panic began to set in, Will asked Nick to send a message to his parents. Suddenly, Will felt intensely hot and tried to jump into the water. A wave crashed over them. Nick clung tightly to the cables, keeping Will close. Nick wrapped his arms around him, holding on as hard as he could. Will removed his life jacket, trying to break free. Another wave struck, causing Will to slip off the boat. Nick kept pulling on the cable, dragging him back. Then a third wave hit. This time, it swept Will away completely, leaving Nick alone, screaming in despair. At the Coast Guard office, Timothy received word that both rescue helicopters had returned without finding them. Everyone was urged not to lose hope and to continue the search with everything they had. That evening, even the crew aboard the Tornado considered calling it off, though 2 of the men chose to stay on deck a little longer. Nick's wife was also beginning to lose hope. She left an emotional voicemail speaking about the years they had spent together. Hours later, Nick heard the sound of the tornado in the distance, though they couldn't see him. He thought about his wife and his mother, drawing strength from them to keep going. After 42 hours adrift at sea, Nick was haunted by visions of his friends and their deaths. He began to let go. He untied the cables and lay down on the boat, waiting for whatever would come next. Just in time, the tornado finally spotted him and dispatched a rescue boat. Timothy was notified and immediately ordered a rescue helicopter to launch. Nick was finally saved. The tornado crew and the Coast Guard celebrated the successful rescue as Nick received medical care. Nick's family was overwhelmed with joy upon learning he had survived. The wives of the other men were not as fortunate. 6 months later, Nick still hears his friends' screams whenever he is near the water. This story is based on a true event. The search for the other men continued for several days before being called off. They were officially declared lost at sea.